This is The Flower of Freedom, and we welcome you here to this original book. All rights to the book and to this presentation are reserved. This is Chapter 53, The Brown-Haired Man. Please take your seat. It's ready for you. It's been waiting. You're very welcome here. You and your good heart, settle in. Have a little rest. And I'll read. This is Chapter 53, The Brown-Haired Man. It had been a long flight from Rio. Hans had left his home in Buenos Aires the previous Wednesday, and he stayed in a hotel in Rio, where he dyed his blonde hair while he passed the time waiting for his flight to Switzerland. Traveling internationally was still tricky, even 2 decades after the war. Most of Hans' buddies lived in Buenos Aires or in the countryside around him, so he never lacked for company, and travel was seldom all that tempting. Buenos Aires suited him admirably. He had his privacy. He had met a guy who came to visit about twice a year. Jeff knew his tastes, and he kept him in a steady supply of girls for the right price. His name ensured that his friends had no interest in meeting the guy, thus keeping his life nicely compartmentalized. Money was no problem. He had put away enough in a Swiss bank account while they still had no extradition treaties and secure numbered accounts, that he had plenty to live on for a lifetime. In the interim, Hans had diversified his portfolio. Jeff helped with that too, and his investments were lucrative. The only thing that niggled his life was this trouble with travel. Well, maybe there was one more thing. He had no heir, or so he thought, until Paulette came calling. It had been a shock to see that old woman sitting in his salon. That he had once walked around Paris with her on his arm was rather embarrassing to him now. He had tried to get rid of her, but she seemed committed to convincing him that he loved her. She told him baldly that she loved him, and always had. But it was when she got desperate to have him pay attention to her that she started to babble about a boy who looked just like him. She described him down to the last detail. It was then that Hans paid closer attention to everything the woman said. She told him that her husband had discovered his niece, well, not his niece, his niece's daughter, who was living a lie in Montreal with a boy who had also been conceived at the Pommade Chateau in the Loire Valley, and their adoptive parents. As Paulette babbled away, she told him about the boy's grades and that they had accidentally been sent to her husband, that the boy was very bright and that he wanted to be an engineer, that he was the spitting image of Hans, and that the boy was scheduled to meet his sister on a spring break in Switzerland at the end of February the coming year. It was so easy to get rid of her by promising to meet her at the restaurant near the harbor. He arrived early, and he got his private booth at the back. They knew him there, and he paid them to maintain his privacy, for he often went there with very young girls, and there was no need to have anyone else know his business. He ordered for 2, and everything was on the table when Paulette arrived, right at the specified time. She was dressed to the nines, and she even tried to make a big deal over whether he remembered her perfume. He pretended that he did, as he plied her with champagne and delicacies from the sea and nearby ranches. She ate like a bird, as she always had, picking away at tiny morsels every once in a while. He ensured that he drained every last detail about the boy out of her by employing the most subtle of the interrogation techniques that he had practiced so long and with such efficiency. She even told him the dates of her husband's niece's winter break and the name of the resort in Switzerland where they always went. He learned as much as she knew about his home in Canada. When he had finished eating and was confident that he knew everything Paulette knew about the boy, he could endure her mooning eyes no longer, and he suggested that they go for a romantic walk along the harbor front. They left via the rear door that he frequently used so that no one would observe him. Paulette thought it was romantic. When they were alone near the ocean front, it was the easiest thing in the world to slide up behind her, pretending to kiss her neck, and while he was there, he simply reached up, grasped her chin, and broke her neck. One quick jerk of his strong hands snapped her wrinkled neck, and she slumped lifelessly into his arms. He let her body fall into the water, and he slowly walked away. He whistled as he walked back to his mansion, wondering which of his tasty morsels he would take into his bed that night. He decided on the one in the pink bikini. Hans made his plan. He counted down the days until the end of February, when his son would be in Switzerland. He had decided to close out his numbered account in Zurich some time ago, but it just never made sense to risk the trip for the money alone. The boy was just the incentive Hans needed to kill two birds with one stone, as they say. It was a fortuitous accident that he had deboarded from his plane from Brazil just after the boy had disembarked from his flight from Canada. There was no mistaking who he was. That was certainly his son. It was like looking into a mirror. The chateau had informed him that Colette had been pregnant. Hans was so disgusted by her by then that he had not returned for weeks before that call. They all got boring after a few times. Their dread was not nearly as exciting as their terror. He was busy grooming another girl by then, so when the chateau's commandant called to say that he had to give Colette up and that the baby would belong to the Reich, it was no issue for him. He told them to move her out of the room he had reserved because he was bringing them another resident soon. That seemed to please the commandant, who always needed new breeders. Hans had no idea what had happened to, and he had no care about what happened to, the child or Colette until Paulette so graciously brought him up to date. His son and his friends were unaware that Hans was watching. It was ridiculously simple to follow them to their destination. He sat a few rows from them on the train, having asked the ticket seller where the previous people were going and slipping the man a suitably large currency note for the information, and then purchasing a ticket to the same destination. Once on the train, Hans employed a newspaper, a book, and a hat, and by turning his head whenever one of them looked in his direction, he was not even noticed. Even when they checked into the hotel, Hans sat in the lobby, listening to their banter, but they never noticed him. His SS training still came in handy when he needed it. His son was magnificent. He looked exactly like him. He appeared to be virile and athletic and confident. When the boys left and went up to their rooms, Hans sauntered over to the check-in desk and got the finest room available. He did enjoy skiing, so he also inquired about ski rentals. He would be out early the next day in the hope of catching a glimpse of his son. All he needed was a chance, and he felt certain that he could win the boy over to his side. That's the end of chapter 53. I welcome you again, and I welcome you to come back for chapter 54, which is On the Slopes. Your friend, Deborah.